Hello, Shirley Adams for the Sewing Connection, Series 17, Program 10. Sometimes I find in my collection some really wild fabrics I can't think why I bought. Judging from your letters, I'm not alone, as you keep asking me what to do with them. For starters, keep a file. Cut out of catalogs and magazines any ideas to refer to later as you see how others have used a print in that skirt or that top. Think of motif location on your body. Think of how to cut them up or how to join them together. The one I have on the table is kind of an unusual one in that it's broken up in strange ways. Now these are usually bought by the panel, prints of this sort are. And this panel just happens to be almost a yard long, and yet they wouldn't sell it by the yard because if it's a little shorter than that, eventually it would end up cutting up the motif. So they sell them by the panel. This one's also, about 45 inches wide. And yet it's, well, what do I do with that thing? You have to think about it a while if you do buy it. And I think at the same place a while back I bought several of these. It was at a manufacturer's outlet, as I remember, and they were using them in blouses and jackets, whatever, sometimes skirts. I can see some of these things in wrap skirts, but it's kind of comforting to see what other people have made of them before you do cut them up yourself. Well, as I was looking at this one, I thought, okay, those look like owls, don't they? And it's hard if you have it in a top or in a skirt. It's hard to look a person in the face and talk with them. You instead have these owls staring at you and you feel compelled to stare back at them. Well, what you need to do originally, I guess, is find out how to make these things a little less compelling. So rather than have these owls staring at you, what I decided to do is I made a garment out of this is turn it upside down and see if it's more usable that way. So you have to play with these a while to see what's going to happen. So this way it looks kind of like African masks. Maybe you still see eyes here, but it's a little less compelling than when the owls were staring at you. So this is how I actually made up this top, which is a vest. And I used for the back of it the uncut piece. So here's the uncut one in back. That was the center of the panel, and nothing's changed there. It turned out just about right. I had to trim off a little bit of those African masks as I made this, or I could have made a wider vest and cut off nothing so that I would use it in its entirety, but I decided to do this one instead, so it is cut into somewhat. Now what I have done with the end pieces, because notice how on this one, get the other one out straight also, notice on this one we've got two partial ones, and the very center of this motif is right here, and there's some beyond. Well, that's fine if you're going to overlap it for a front closing, but when you overlap it, you want to make sure when it's buttoned that you will have everything so it comes out looking as one. So when I actually have these buttons done, notice how the buttons are right through the middle of that motif. What I have turned under here is just what goes out to the edge of the fabric, but I made sure that I have it overlapped so the center of that motif is where the buttons are. That follows then that also the buttonholes will be in the same place. And you have to figure out, as far as spacing goes, where are the best places to put those buttonholes. And so I've put them right in the middle of this area, since I'm trying to break up the idea that it's a face. I wanted to get away from the face idea and just have it a design instead. So I did put a buttonhole there and a buttonhole here and there. The buttonholes are equidistant, but in order to use these two areas, which are just about the same, they are the same, then this one just fell in the middle. Now another alternative there might be, or maybe a better one, instead of what I have done with buttonholes, the better one might have been to just put snaps underneath and not break it up with buttonholes at all. But it's something you think through. Well, this one was just kind of fun to decide what to do with it. It was a challenge. It wasn't, I think I just bought it because it was a challenge. I don't think I bought it because I absolutely love the fabric, is usually what happens. It was just, what do you do with that? You buy it and find out what you do with it, I believe is what my thing was. Well, what I did when I laid the pattern is go ahead and fold it in half maybe to cut this out, but make sure that you do have this down the middle, or maybe it's easier for you to cut out one half at a time. So this was to be cut on the fold. It didn't have a back seam, and you would want to use a pattern that doesn't break it up, that doesn't have a back seam. So maybe I cut out one part of this and then flipped it over and cut out the other part. Either way, it doesn't matter, just as long as you make sure it comes out the same. And very often it's easier on things like this to cut it out single thicknesses, 1/2 at a time. Because if you don't, if you cut it double, you're going to have to do possibly even more work in that you'll have to fold it down the center and then have to pin along here to make sure, let's see, does this little squiggle here come out the very same on the other side? And you'll have to adjust that around repeatedly until it is the same. So for this reason, it might be easier to cut it out single thickness. So kind of think it through. Don't do anything of this sort hastily, because sure as you do, you'll regret it and wish you had done it some other way. Okay, what I did then for the front, and happily there's enough black space in between the two so that if you're bigger or if you're smaller, it will accommodate you, hopefully, because of all that black space. And also the fact that all this is black, and black's black. You can always find another fabric that is equally black. You know how with black, sometimes it has sort of a brownish cast or kind of a greenish cast or something. So you have to make sure you do match it with an equal black if you do have to supplement it. But it could easily be supplemented and put a side panel in if you needed to make it larger than this. So that's not a problem. Whoever designed this was at least wise in thinking, okay, let's leave it plain there so that you can do these changes. As far as the front goes, what you need to do there when you lay your pattern is make sure, and this is just a basic vest, I don't remember what brand it was originally, but I've just traced it on this pattern tracer, which is an easy thing to work with. Very often I use the original pattern, the tissue paper pattern, and just fuse a lightweight fusible on the back side of it so that it does stay around for a long time so I can use it forever without it falling apart. Other times I trace it on this because this is also indestructible and I can use this forever. And it has the grain lines already on it since it has this grid on it. Okay, what I would do with this is realize that this has to be the center. Right down the middle of this motif is the center. Therefore, when you lay the pattern, you would put it so that the center front line, because that's always on a pattern, they always tell you where the center front line is, you would just make sure to put that stripe right down the center of your designs on the fabric, and that way you can't go wrong. Whatever is extra out here, then terrific. You can just use that. Now notice what I also did. I decided instead of cutting it as this vest pattern is, that I would cut it with a high neck. And so usually your neckline is about 3 or so inches lower. Let me get a little measure here. Usually it's about 3 inches lower than this point on your shoulder. So 3, 3.5. This one I made about 3 1/4, 3 3/4. It doesn't matter. Somewhere around there it's going to come out below this hollow in your neckline. Just somewhere below that will be fine. And so what I've done is I cut this out. It's just come straight up until it was that far below the shoulder point. And I see by this that I've cut it off right about here. So I had mine located lower. I'll just go ahead and move it. About like this it was located when I cut it out. And anyway, just made a round neck. That's simple enough. You can always do that on a pattern and change it. So the neckline's cut out like this, and what's left over, what's beyond what I needed here, you can see is then just folded under, and that forms the facing. And okay, just very easy to fold that under, and we've got a facing, so you can very easily make a completed top this way. And I assume the manufacturer meant something of this sort when they made it. This is actually very pretty silk here. I was thinking it was rayon, but no, that's silk, you can tell. Okay, then what I also decided to do, instead of putting this dart in, I just have it cut straight. And I cut it down below the waist so that I have a drawstring here. And then it just does what it wants to down below the waist. So I did just leave the whole thing here. I've turned up a hem, and so I pretty much used the whole panel. I didn't waste any of it. Now I found that when I put it all together and tried it on, it was a little bit snug in the hip area. It wasn't quite as large as I thought it was going to be because I extended it. I didn't make it just like the vest. I came down longer, and therefore it came out a little tight. You can always do something like this at the bottom of a garment, at the whether it's vest, jacket, blouse, whatever. You can always leave a slit there, just leave it open. So this actually is slit almost to the waist, which is where the drawstring is. And that's kind of a neat idea when you find that you did cut something a little bit too small. As far as this drawstring, what do you use for a casing? Well, this has a lining in it. And so after the lining's in, after everything's complete, but before you put the lining in, or before you close it all up, you better think about it. If you're going to put a drawstring in, where is it going to come out? Because you don't want it to come out at the edge of your fabric, then you can't overlap and tie it. I wanted this to come out somewhere short of the center front. And so I made a buttonhole right here before I completely finished it up while it was still open at the hemline. And with that buttonhole, that's where the drawstring is going to come out. Then after you have the lining in, it's simply a matter of sewing the two layers together to produce that drawstring. And that sewing that you would do is across the bottom of the area and this side of the buttonhole toward the center front of the buttonhole, and then go ahead like this. That way the drawstring can come right out the buttonhole and it works just fine. But make sure you leave plenty of space in the center area that you can bring it together and tie it in a bow or a knot or however you plan to do this. But that's how you take any vest pattern and just make something a little different out of it. So you can use that same vest pattern, whatever it is that you like, over and over and over again without just changing the neckline, just changing a little bit here and there. So this is what I did with it. I could also, with this one, have made maybe a blouse. I don't know what the original manufacturer made out of it or what they intended. But if I decided to make a blouse, maybe one kind of like this, notice how this great big motif that they have here, it looks like marble. It looks like going into a big office building and seeing marble walls with panels is kind of what this is like. Notice how perfectly this matches. You know it's a high-priced blouse, or it wouldn't match this way. So what they did to match this, the front and the sleeve, and have that paneled wall match the same all over, and notice how perfectly it's done down the front. This is, I know what the price of this is because I know what the brand is. Their blouses always run about $700, which is a few $100s more than I'd like to pay, but I'd like to have mine look the same way. And so I'll take just as much care with them when I lay the pattern. Okay, how they laid that pattern to make it work out just right. You always match this at the underarm point and it'll work out right every time. So here I just have a blouse pattern, not the one she's wearing at all, just a blouse pattern. It doesn't matter what it is. And what I would do when I put this pattern down is, of course, lay the center front right here so that the motif comes out right. But wherever it comes out at the side, and this isn't going to be continuous, but wherever this comes out at the side, notice the level. And the fact that it comes right here, right at the top of this little triangular thing, the fact that that's what happens. When I lay the sleeve pattern, then I'm going to make sure it's at the same place. And with sleeve patterns, no matter what brand you buy, it's always a single notch at the front and a double notch at the back, so you know front from back of sleeve because of the single, double. This one has a triple notch. Usually they're double notch at the back. Well, anyway, what I want to make sure of is that underarm point comes at the same level so that even though these two motifs don't match, if you were a tiny person and had a little narrow blouse, then it would touch each other. Then they would come out here so that the red would actually show on both of them. But if that's the case, you want that same level so that everything looks the same going around your blouse. And so what I would then do is I cut this out. I would also probably fold this sleeve in half and make sure that the center of the sleeve is right at the center of this motif. So this is how I'd lay the blouse sleeve so that it comes out looking just right. But I want to make sure that the underarm point is at the same level. Isn't that easy? It'll match every time. You can't go wrong when you look at that underarm point. And so no matter whether it's wider or narrower, it'll still be the same level and look nice going all around your blouse or your jacket. You do a jacket the same way if you're going to match that. Well, if you have a print that's so compelling that you think, what in the world am I going to do? And by the way, with that blouse or jacket, if this is all you have, then of course you could just get plain black for the rest of it if you don't have any more motif than this, and just use it where it is. Now, you'd match the sleeve in the same way. Just make sure that if you're going to make one sleeve with this motif on, if this is all you have, I'd use this motif on one sleeve and make the other one plain black. but you would want to have this the center of the sleeve, and then cut a seam allowance beyond that, and then do the same on the other side so that when you seam them together they come out just right and it looks like the complete design. Okay, anytime you have though a pattern, a design that's so compelling that it's just too much, it's just overpowering. Really, the center of attention should come up to your face, and if it's just being caught somewhere else in your garment, maybe you want to break it up a little bit and make it less compelling. Here's something you might do. I love this craft cutter, or whatever kind of cutter you want to call it, but it's this measuring, that's this ruler connected to the cutter, and it's so easy to use. When you cut straight lines, it's just a perfect thing. Well, anyway, what I'm going to do, and by the way, this is real slippery silk fabric, and it doesn't slide at all because there is a rubber little, I'm not going to lift it up right now because I have it placed here just right, but there's rubber underneath, so it just grips your fabric nicely. And so I'm just going to cut this. And if we cut stripes, I'll cut a couple more. While it's up in the air, I'll show you the rubber backing on it. So that really does hold the fabric in place nicely. I'll cut one stripe right about this size, which is, 1.25 inches wide. And if you're going to cut stripes and cover up some of that, I don't want all those stripes just regular size. I'd like one maybe a little wider and one a little narrower. This one I'll make about 3 inches wide. So I'm looking at the bottom of the ruler and the top of the ruler and getting them to come out to the same place on both edges so I know I have a straight line here. And then maybe I want one, just sort of in between, so I'll cut it about this wide. But once you have several stripes, this might be a good way to go. Now, of course, you'd have to have seam allowances with these, so they'd end up a little narrower. But if that looks like just too much and you really can't tolerate it, and yet, by gum, you bought it and you're going to use this print for something, how about just breaking it up like this by putting some solid in with it? And maybe this way it will be more livable and it will be more tolerable. So you might think of doing this. If you don't want those owls to stare at you, this might be just the way to go. So think about doing that. You can always do different things. Or, and if you do this, of course, you would probably be cutting the fabric up. You could applique this on, but probably you'd be cutting the fabric up and making little seams everywhere. But this way it turns into something completely different, and that's another possibility. Just remember, the possibilities are endless. Well, let's take a look at what the models are wearing and see some other kind of bold fabrics that you'd have to consider. This first one is a jacket with all its geometrics. When I bought that, I think I was going to make kind of a longish straight skirt, maybe a wrap skirt, somewhere down almost to my ankles. And suddenly I decided, no, I'm going to make this jacket instead. It's a quilted jacket. It's just quilted on some of those lines. But this baseball jacket is very, very simple. Now with a print like this, I don't want to break it up. I don't want to have to seam it any place that I can avoid seaming it. So what I would do with a print like this is cut as simple a thing as possible. This was from the end of Series 11, this jacket was, and it was one where it's all cut in one piece. The only place you cut up the fabric at all is up the center and around the neckline. Other than that, it's all one piece. So this is a good thing to do with a bold print that you don't want to break up and have to worry about seams. The tulip blouse and skirt are another one. Now these bold prints you can use for things. This is a two-piece dress here. But what I discovered, I cut it out rather hastily, and where I made an error that I regretted afterwards, I think, what are the chances if you cut it out double thickness that the layer underneath will be just about the same as the top layer? You know, very slim. I was cutting it quickly. Well, I got all finished, and there I had those two big giant tulips, not right on my bust, but just a little bit above it in the chest area, and it looked like a bit too much. Well, what I've done with it is I have some extra scrap here, and I have fusible on the back side of it, the peel-off paper type. And right now I just have a big leaf fused across one of those tulips to break it up a little bit so it won't look like there are two big tulips in the chest area. And after many washings, if that tulip gets a little raggedy around the outside, I don't want to satin stitch it on because it'll look like an applique. I want it to look like it's part of the fabric. So I'm all ready for the next time. What I can do is just cut out this leaf, and this one then I can applique over the space when the other one kind of wears off. So I'm prepared for it. but it certainly makes me think next time I would cut something like that, single layers, so I know exactly where those fabrics are or where those prints are, where those motifs are, so that that won't happen. I'll just save these stripes in case I need them for something else. Okay, another fabric that I have that caused a little bit of concern before I cut it out is the one that I'm wearing. And this one was an all-over pattern, but you want to make sure that you get these in graceful places when you have big motifs like this. Again, big flowers. And so what I wanted to make sure that I did is just get them sort of balanced. If I had one up here, then I wanted another one down here. That type thing is what I'd like to do. And I want to make sure that I don't have flowers right at the bust so that it looks kind of funny, awkward. What I also wanted to do is think, wouldn't it be nice if one flower would just come around and match here to make a complete flower, and then use a button for the center of it that looks like the center of a button. Well, you can get that match to come out completely, and I kind of showed you how on that original print. It's just a matter of when you lay one front, and usually I would lay the right front since that's how the pattern is, and just make sure I know, here I'll just put it on here, I make sure when I lay it that I know exactly where this center front is. So I would cut this side out, the right side, and I would make a little clip in the fabric right here and right there, right where the center front is, so I know where it is. And then I would take the pattern off, and with this cutout piece, don't turn it over, I would just move it over on the print and find a place where it blended in, where you can't even see it. And when I've come to that place, I would put a pin top and bottom right where those center front clips are. Just put a pin there. Then you turn your pattern over, get rid of the cutout fabric you already have. Turn your pattern over and make sure that your pattern, the line of the center front, make sure it's right where those two pins are. And go ahead and cut out this, and you know that it's going to completely match then when the center front overlaps, as long as you do that. So remember that with the bold prints, because it's going to look a lot better. I have back there on the mannequins a couple of other prints that you might want to think about. Now this animal print is not wildly colorful, but it is wild enough that I would hesitate to maybe have a whole outfit out of that. You have to be either tall and slim or maybe even petite, but if you're anything more than a small size, you might want to think twice about having a whole big outfit. I can see a jumpsuit of that on a small person. On me, I don't know. I don't think so. I would like to tone it down with those black pants instead. So mix a lot of solid in with some of these bold prints. The one next to it, the big target there, this was a panel print also that you buy by the panel, and there were two of them side by side on the width of the fabric, and so the back is identical to the front. I just used it as a very simple shell. The only seaming in it, well, there are side seams of course, but the back looks the very same. And when it comes to the shoulders here, it just kind of tapers down. Now there was a yellow band, like this band. It was all the way around. It was a scarf print really, and there are a lot of these scarf prints on the market, but I did have to, of course, seam it here at the top, so it just matches, top and or the front and back just match as they come down to that shoulder slant. So it's easy enough to use these in small places like a vest, a little sleeveless shell like that, or a cap sleeve shell. In small places you can get away with these bold prints more easily than you can in an all-over design. Here's another one that's kind of bold, and yet this won't be difficult to work with to make a dress or whatever with it. It's an all-over design. You just put it wherever you want to. I have another panel design here. When I bought this, I don't know what my thought was. There are a couple of these motifs here, a couple of them, and probably they meant for one to go on a sleeve, or maybe both of them, or maybe put one off center and put one on the back, wherever. The more I look at this, and by the way, you can't use this upside down, it's a tent, and so you have to use it right side up. The more I look at this one, the more I think, okay, that's going to be a lining inside of something. I don't think I even want it on the outside. That's a possibility, because you need linings here and there. Here's another one that I just love the colors in it, and it also is kind of a target. It's a scarf print, but I have several of these. I have 4 of these big squares, actually, it opens up to. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it yet, but you have to think about something like this. You might even put it on the bias. and I find that when I have it on the bias, in some places on my body, it makes me look just like a barrel, and I'd prefer not to look like that. So I probably wouldn't want to put it like this, so that that big square there on the diagonal, so that that big thing is right where my midsection is. But it might look rather pretty if I would put it so that that big square is up, if I can get it there, is up at the shoulders. This might look rather nice up here because it broadens your shoulders and it balances your hips, and that might be a very flattering spot. So think also on some of these about turning it on the bias, and at some other angle it might do the job just right. So there are so many possibilities here, but you don't do them hastily. You think about it. And just remember that with any of these, being a sewer means that you are in control and can tame even the wildest print. You also have the power to change a fabric's color to make it just right. We'll do that in several ways next time. Come join me then.